The unexpected legacy. John walked into the old mansion that had been left to him. The air inside was thick with dust, and the smell of old books filled the vast space. The mansion was nothing like the modern homes he was used to. His uncle, a man who had always been a mystery to him, had lived here in solitude. John never truly understood the relationship between his uncle and the outside world. They had rarely spoken, and when they did, it was often about strange topics that made John uncomfortable. But today, everything was different. His uncle was gone, and John was left with an inheritance that came with unexpected surprises. Will had been read earlier that morning, and it contained a shocking revelation. Not only had John inherited a mansion and a fortune, but he had also inherited something else. Standing beside the tall marble columns of the mansion's entrance was Lyra, a young alien woman who had been his uncle's servant for years. Her alien features were striking. Her skin was a soft silver that shimmered in the light, and her eyes were a bright, almost golden hue. John had never seen anything like it before, and he didn't know how to feel about it. She wasn't just an alien. She was a slave. The room was filled with people, some of them family members, others business associates of his uncle. They had come to witness the reading of the will, but now they were left staring at the unexpected inheritance. There were whispers all around him. Some people looked at Lyra with curiosity, while others eyed her with suspicion. No one knew what to make of her presence. John stood still, watching her. She was so quiet, so composed. She didn't seem afraid, but there was a strange sadness in her eyes. John had heard of alien slaves before, but never had he thought he would be in a position to own one. He wasn't sure how to handle the situation. Should he treat her like any other servant, or was there something more to her than that? John, one of his uncle's old friends, Mr. Hawkins, said, pulling him from his thoughts, "You've inherited a great deal of wealth, but you've also inherited responsibility. This alien Lyra was your uncle's personal servant. She was bound to him, and now she's bound to you. You should know that she's not just a servant, she's a symbol of your uncle's power. He controlled her, and now you do. You must decide what to do with her." John nodded slowly, trying to take in everything that was happening. His uncle had been a powerful man, feared by many, and yet here he was, leaving John with something he didn't understand. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be the kind of man his uncle had been. The idea of controlling someone, especially an alien, didn't sit well with him. But the reality was that Lyra was now his responsibility, and he had to decide what to do with her. "I'll need time to think," John said, his voice calm but uncertain. "I didn't expect this." As he walked through the mansion, the other people began to leave, talking amongst themselves about the unexpected turn of events. John didn't pay attention to their words. He had more important things to think about. Lyra remained standing at the entrance, still as stone. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. John could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't know how to respond to it. Once they were alone, John finally spoke. "You don't have to call me master," John said softly, his voice a little rough. "I don't believe in this system. I don't think it's right." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, John saw something in them, an emotion. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something more complicated, something he couldn't name. She stood tall and didn't look away. "I do not have a choice," she replied, her voice low and calm. "I am bound to serve you, as I was bound to your uncle. I was created for this purpose." John felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't want to see Lyra as an object, something that was created for someone else's use. She was a person, a living being with thoughts, feelings, and experiences. He could see it in the way she held herself, in the quiet strength that she seemed to radiate despite her circumstances. John had always believed in fairness, in treating others with dignity. But here, in front of him, was a stark reminder that the universe wasn't always fair. "Do you want to be free?" John asked, his voice more urgent now. "I can set you free. I don't want to keep you like this, Lyra." For a moment, Lyra was silent. Her golden eyes studied him, as though she were trying to understand whether he was serious. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know what freedom means," she said softly. "I have never known anything but servitude. I do not know how to be free." John didn't know how to respond. He had never met anyone like Lyra before. He had read stories about aliens, about the way they lived and thought. But they were just stories, fantasy. Now, standing in front of him, Lyra was real. She was alive. She had a history, a life before this moment, a life that John couldn't even begin to understand. "I'll figure something out," John said, though he wasn't sure how. He knew that his decision would affect more than just his relationship with Lyra. It would affect everything: his future, his family, his legacy. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to make a different kind of choice, one that would change the course of his life and the life of the alien woman standing before him. As the evening wore on, John couldn't help but replay the moment in his mind. The weight of his inheritance, the strange power that came with it, sat heavy on his shoulders. But there was something else, something even heavier. The feeling that his life, his choices, were now intertwined with Lyra's, and no matter what he decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The first encounter days passed after John's decision to keep Lyra in his home. He couldn't stop thinking about her, wondering what kind of life she had led before she was brought here. It was clear she was different from anyone he had ever known, but there was also something about her that felt strangely familiar. He had inherited a legacy, yes, but he hadn't expected it to come with so many questions. What was he supposed to do with her? What did freedom mean for someone like Lyra, someone who had never known anything but servitude? John spent the following days alone, working through the mountains of paperwork his uncle had left behind. The mansion was quiet, almost too quiet. The once lively halls felt empty now, as though the mansion itself had lost its soul with the passing of its master. Lyra was still around, of course, always close by, but she never spoke much. She went about her duties silently, doing everything with precision and grace. She never complained, never showed any sign of discomfort, but John couldn't help but feel that there was more beneath the surface. She was living with a weight, a burden he couldn't begin to understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long across the mansion, John decided to speak to her again. He had spent most of the day going through old records, and now he found himself standing at the doorway of the study, watching her from afar. She was sitting by the large window, gazing out at the alien landscape beyond the estate. The stars had already begun to appear in the sky, and the soft light from the window cast a serene glow on her face. She looked lost in thought, and for the first time, John felt like he was seeing her as something more than just a servant. "Lyra," he said softly, taking a step closer. She turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his with a calm intensity. "Yes, master?" Her voice was soft, but it had a quiet power to it, like the calm before a storm. John hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to continue. "I've been thinking about everything. About you, about what my uncle did, about what you must have gone through." He took another step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know what's right, but I want to help. I want to understand. You deserve more than this." Lyra's eyes softened as she stood up, but she didn't approach him. She stayed where she was, keeping her distance. "You can't help me, John. I am not like you. I am not human. I do not have the freedom you think I deserve. I was born for this life." Her words hit John like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that everyone deserved the chance at freedom. But how could he explain that to someone who had never known anything else? How could he convince her that there was more to life than serving someone else? "Why do you think you were born for this life?" he asked quietly. "Why do you believe that you don't deserve more?" Lyra looked out the window again, her expression distant. "Because I was created to serve. I do not know how to be anything else. I do not know how to live freely." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I am not like you, John. I don't belong in your world." The words stung, but John refused to back down. He had to believe that there was more to Lyra than just her past. There had to be more to her than this idea that she was bound to serve. He had seen the strength in her eyes, the quiet courage that came with surviving years of hardship. She wasn't just some alien slave. She was a person with hopes, fears, and dreams just like anyone else. "You belong here, Lyra," John said, firmly, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You belong with me. I'm not going to force you to stay here, but I want to help you. I want to give you the freedom you deserve." Lyra didn't speak for a long time. She just stood there, her eyes fixed on him, as if she was trying to understand if he truly meant what he said. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Freedom is not something I can just take, John. It is something that must be earned, something that must be fought for." John nodded slowly, understanding her words more than she knew. "Then we'll fight for it, together." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was processing his words, weighing them in her mind. For the first time, John saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And that was enough for him to hold on to. The next day, John made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and wait for things to change on their own. If he wanted to help Lyra, he had to take action. He couldn't just free her from her physical chains. He had to help her understand what freedom truly meant. He needed to show her that there was more to life than servitude, more to existence than just surviving. He called for a meeting with his business partners, the people who had been so quick to remind him of the weight of his inheritance. He needed their support, or at least their understanding, if he was going to make any real changes. They had always seen him as someone who followed the rules, someone who played by the book. But now, John knew he had to break those rules if he was going to do what was right. As the meeting began, John could feel the tension in the room. His partners were waiting for him to say something, to explain what was going to happen now that he was in charge. They wanted to know what direction he was going to take the business, how he was going to protect the legacy his uncle had left behind, but John wasn't interested in protecting that legacy anymore. Not in the way they thought. "I've made a decision," John said, standing tall at the head of the table. "I will not continue in my uncle's footsteps. I will not treat people alien or human-like they are things to be owned. I am freeing Lyra. She will no longer be bound to this place." The room fell silent. His partners exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of his declaration. But John wasn't backing down. This was his decision, and he would stand by it. "You can't do that," one of the older men, Mr. Hawkins, said sharply. "You'll ruin everything. Your uncle's legacy." "I don't care about my uncle's legacy," John interrupted, his voice firm. "I care about doing what's right." The room grew still, and for the first time, John could see the doubt in their eyes. They weren't used to seeing him like this. They weren't used to him standing up for what he believed in. "Maybe it's time for a new legacy," John said quietly. "One where everyone is free." The shocking decision, the days that followed John's announcement were tense. His decision to free Lyra was met with resistance from all sides. People who had once respected him began to question his judgment. Even some of his family members who had come to expect wealth and power from his inheritance were upset by his actions. John knew the consequences of his decision, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Lyra, meanwhile, remained quiet. She didn't say much, but John could see the small changes in her. The cold walls she had built around herself seemed to crack just slightly. She was starting to believe that, maybe, just maybe, things could be different. John had given her a glimmer of hope, but the road to freedom was long and uncertain. She didn't know if she was ready for it, or if she even deserved it. But with each passing day, she was starting to believe in the possibility of something better. John continued to push forward, determined to make the best of the situation. He spent his days dealing with business matters and his nights thinking about how to help Lyra adjust to her new life. But there was one thing that continued to weigh heavily on his mind: the moment he would have to confront his family and business. Partners, they weren't going to let this go easily, and John knew he had to be prepared for what was to come. One afternoon, as John sat at his desk going over some financial documents, there was a knock at the door. He looked up to see Lyra standing in the doorway. She was wearing a simple dress, one that John had bought for her in the hopes that it would make her feel more at ease. She looked different now, less guarded, more human. John had been noticing the changes in her, and it filled him with a sense of pride. She was starting to become the person he had always hoped she could be. "John, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "Of course," John replied, setting aside the papers and standing up. "What's on your mind?" Lyra stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She looked around, as if unsure where to begin. John could tell she was nervous, but he didn't push her. He waited for her to speak, knowing she would when she was ready. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Lyra began, her eyes meeting his. "About freedom. I'm not sure if I understand it, but I want to try." John smiled gently. "You don't have to understand everything all at once. It's a big change, and it won't happen overnight. But I'm here to help you, Lyra. I want you to know that." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "I know you want to help, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm scared, John. I don't know how to live any other way. I don't know how to be free." John took a step closer to her, his gaze full of empathy. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. I'll be here with you." Lyra's eyes shimmered with something close to hope, though it was still cautious. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to try. I'll trust you, John." John's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at her. She was starting to believe in herself, in the possibility of a life beyond the one she had been forced to live. That was all he could ask for. He had given her a chance, and now it was up to both of them to make the most of it. The next day, John called for another meeting with his business partners. This time, he knew it wouldn't be as easy as before. The pressure was mounting, and everyone was watching him closely. They were waiting to see if he would stand by his decision, or if he would back down. John couldn't afford to back down, not now. The path he had chosen was the right one, and he had to make sure everyone knew that. As he entered the meeting room, John was met with a tense silence. His partners were all seated, their eyes fixed on him, but no one spoke. John could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He took a deep breath and stood at the head of the table. "I've made my decision," John said firmly, his voice steady. "Lyra will not be treated as a slave. I will not sell her, and I will not allow anyone to take her from me. She is free, and she will remain free." There was a moment of stunned silence before one of the older men, Mr. Hawkins, spoke up. "You can't be serious, John. You're talking about an alien slave, someone who has been bound to your uncle's estate for years. You can't just set her free and expect everything to continue as normal. This will destroy everything." John looked at Mr. Hawkins, his gaze unwavering. "I am serious. I'm not going to let the mistakes of the past define the future. I'm not going to let fear control my decisions. But this is more than just a matter of personal choice," another partner, Mr. Williams, added. "You've inherited power. John, you've inherited wealth. You can't just throw it all away for some alien woman. She's not just an alien woman, John replied, his voice rising slightly. She's a person. And she deserves better than to be treated like an object. I will not let my uncle's legacy be one of cruelty and oppression. I'll find another way to move forward. A better way. The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire world was holding its breath. But John stood his ground. He wasn't going to back down. He knew what was right, and he wasn't going to let anyone make him doubt that. Finally, Mr. Hawkins spoke again, though his tone was less certain than before. You're making a mistake, John, but I can see that you're not going to change your mind. No, I'm not, John said firmly. And I'm not asking for your approval. I'm just letting you know that things are going to be different from now on. With that, John turned and left the room. The meeting was over, but the decision had been made. There was no turning back now. Later that night, John and Lyra sat together in the study. It had been a long day, filled with difficult decisions and tense conversations, but John couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the right path. He had chosen to stand up for what was right, and though it hadn't been easy, he knew it had to be done. John, Lyra said quietly, breaking the silence, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen next. John turned to her, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, Lyra, but you're not alone. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time. Lyra nodded slowly, a faint smile touching her lips. Thank you, John. I'm glad I met you. John smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. I'm glad I met you too, Lyra. Together we'll make it through. The consequences of freedom. As the weeks passed, John's decision continued to stir up tension in his life. He had expected some backlash, but he didn't anticipate the weight of the storm that was about to hit. His business associates were no longer just questioning him. They were actively trying to undermine his decisions. The media, too, had gotten wind of his controversial actions, and soon, the mansion was filled with reporters, all eager to catch a glimpse of the young man who had set an alien free. John didn't care about their opinions. He had made his choice, and he wasn't going to back down. But there were consequences, there always were. The wealth and power his uncle had left him were now at risk. People who had once supported him now saw him as a liability, someone who couldn't be trusted to make sound decisions. But there was one person who didn't see him as weak. Lyra. She had been quiet for the most part, staying out of the spotlight, but her presence was a constant source of strength for John. One evening, as the mansion's grand chandelier flickered in the dim light, John sat alone in his study. He had been buried in paperwork for hours, but the weight of everything pressing on him had made it hard to concentrate. His mind kept wandering to Lyra. She had come a long way since he had first met her. She was no longer just a servant or a slave. She had become something more. She had become his equal, and though it had taken time, John knew they were both beginning to understand each other. The sound of soft footsteps drew his attention. He looked up to see Lyra standing in the doorway, her silver hair shimmering in the low light. John, she said, her voice calm but with an edge of concern. We need to talk. John motioned for her to come in. Of course. What's on your mind? Lyra stepped into the room, her eyes flickering to the papers on his desk. She hesitated before speaking. I know this isn't easy for you, she began, her tone gentle. I can see the strain it's putting on you. The business, the people you're trying to impress, the weight of everything. It's too much. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. I knew it would be hard, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. They're all turning on me, Lyra. I've lost the support of almost everyone. My name is becoming a joke in the business world. I'm not sure how long I can keep this up. Lyra stepped closer, her voice steady. You don't have to carry this burden alone, John. I'm here for you. I want to help. John looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. She had already given him so much. I don't know how you can help. I've put everything at risk, and I don't want to drag you down with me. Lyra shook her head. I'm not a burden to you, John. You're not dragging me down. I'm standing by you because I believe in what you're doing. I believe in you. John looked at her, his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't expected. I don't know what I'd do without you, Lyra. She smiled softly, a warmth in her eyes that made John feel like he wasn't alone in the world. You won't have to find out. We'll face this together. The next day, as John prepared for another meeting with his remaining business partners, he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him more than ever. He had tried to reach out to some of his uncle's old contacts, but most of them had refused to even consider working with him. It was as if they had all turned their backs, or unwilling to accept the changes he was trying to make. When he entered the boardroom, the air was thick with tension. The few partners who still stood by him looked nervous, unsure of what was going to happen next. John stood at the head of the table, his posture straight and confident. He wasn't going to let them see how scared he truly was. I know many of you have questions, John began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I know you're concerned about my decisions, about my future, and about the future of this company. But let me make one thing clear. I will not go back on my word. I freed Lyra because it was the right thing to do. And I will not let anyone make me regret it. The room was silent for a long moment, the tension palpable. Then, Mr. Hawkins spoke, his voice thick with disdain. You're making a huge mistake. John, you're throwing away everything your uncle worked for. This is not about right or wrong. This is about power. And you've given that power away. You think people are going to respect you for this. You're wrong. John met his gaze, refusing to back down. I don't care about the power anymore, Mr. Hawkins. I care about doing what's right. If I have to lose everything to make a change, then so be it. The room fell silent again, the partners exchanging uncertain glances. John could feel the shift in the atmosphere. He wasn't just fighting for his place in the business world anymore. He was fighting for his integrity, his beliefs, and for Lyra. She had become more than just an alien or a former slave to him. She had become his symbol of what was truly important: freedom, equality, and the courage to stand up for what was right. I'm not asking for your approval, John continued, his voice firm. I'm telling you that this is the direction I'm going in. And if you can't follow me, then maybe this partnership is over. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to oppose him. But to his surprise, one of the other partners, a younger man named Chris, spoke up. I think you're right, John, Chris said quietly. We've been so focused on profit, on keeping things the way they've always been, that we've lost sight of what really matters. Maybe it's time for a change. John felt a surge of hope at Chris's words, but he didn't let it show. This was just the beginning. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't fighting this battle alone. As the meeting ended, John walked out of the room, his head held high. He knew there would be more battles to come, more people to convince, more sacrifices to make. But with Lyra by his side, he knew that together, they could change the world. Later that night, John and Lyra sat together in the quiet of the study. The mansion was still, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It had been a long, difficult day, but John felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Are you okay? Lyra asked, her voice soft as she looked at him. John smiled at her, feeling a warmth in his chest. I'm more than okay. I think we're finally starting to make a difference. Lyra reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. We're not alone anymore, John. We have each other. John squeezed her hand, his heart full. Yes, we do. And together, we'll make it through. A new beginning. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the floor. John sat at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him, but his mind was elsewhere. The last few months had been a whirlwind of change, and it seemed like every day brought new challenges. Yet, through it all, John knew one thing for certain: he was no longer the person he had been before. The decisions he had made, the risks he had taken, had shaped him into someone stronger, more determined, and more certain of his path. Lyra stood by the window, looking out at the vast alien landscape that stretched beyond the estate. She had changed too. When she had first arrived here, she was a quiet, almost broken soul, living in the shadows of her past. But now she was different. She was more than just a former slave. She was a partner, an equal. She was a person with a future that she had never thought possible. John watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with pride. She had come so far in such a short time. It was hard to believe that only a few months ago she had been standing in chains, her life controlled by someone else's will. Now she was standing here, free and ready to take on the world. "Lyra," John said softly, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Yes, John?" John smiled. "I've been thinking. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot to do. This mansion, this estate, it's too big for just the two of us. I want to do something more with it. I want to change things, not just for us, but for everyone." Lyra raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I want to turn this place into something new," John said, standing up from his desk and walking over to her. "I want to create a sanctuary for people like you, people who have been oppressed or controlled. A place where they can find freedom, find themselves. A place where they can live with dignity, not fear." Lyra's eyes softened as she listened. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the passion that burned within him. It was a vision that made her believe, for the first time in her life, that anything was possible. "You want to build a place for others like me?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes," John replied. "But it's not just for people like you. It's for anyone who needs a fresh start. A place where people can learn to live freely, to be themselves, without judgment or fear. A place where equality and respect are the foundation, not power or control." Lyra stood silently for a moment, her mind racing. She had never imagined such a thing. A place where she could truly be free, where everyone was treated as equals. It seemed too good to be true. But she had seen John's heart, seen the way he had treated her and the others. She knew that if anyone could make this vision a reality, it was him. "I believe in you, John," she said softly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "If anyone can do this, it's you." John reached out and took her hand, his grip strong but gentle. "Together we can make it happen. We'll need help, of course. We'll need people who believe in this vision, who are willing to work with us. But I know we can do it." Lyra nodded, her heart full of hope. For the first time in her life, she truly believed in the possibility of change. The future that had once seemed so uncertain now seemed filled with endless possibilities. The road ahead was long, and there was much to be done. John and Lyra began working together, reaching out to others who shared their vision. It wasn't easy, and there were many obstacles along the way, but with each step, they moved closer to their goal. They began to rebuild the estate, turning it into a thriving community where people of all kinds, human and alien, could live together in harmony. As word of the sanctuary spread, more and more people came, drawn by the promise of freedom and equality. Some had been freed from oppressive systems, others had escaped lives of servitude, but all of them shared one thing in common: the desire to start anew. They found a home in the sanctuary that John and Lyra had created, a place where they could Live without fear, a place where their voices were heard. Despite the challenges, the sanctuary flourished. John and Lyra worked tirelessly, managing the estate and helping to create an environment where everyone could thrive. They taught those who came to the sanctuary about the values of respect, kindness, and equality. They encouraged people to pursue their passions and dreams, to find their own purpose in life. But it wasn't just about the physical work. John and Lyra also worked to heal the emotional scars that many of the people carried. They knew that true freedom wasn't just about being free from physical chains. It was about learning to live without fear, to embrace one's own worth. It was about building relationships based on mutual respect and understanding, not control and power. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of their study, John and Lyra reflected on everything they had accomplished. The mansion was now a vibrant, thriving community, and they had created a safe space for so many people who had once felt lost and forgotten. "We did it, Lyra," John said, a smile spreading across his face. "We've built something amazing." Lyra looked around the room, her eyes filled with pride. "We couldn't have done it without each other, John. You showed me what freedom really is. You gave me a chance to live a life I never thought possible." John reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and comforting. "We did it together. You've taught me just as much as I've taught you. I couldn't have made this vision a reality without you by my side." Lyra smiled, a soft, genuine smile that lit up her face. "Thank you, John. You've given me more than just freedom. You've given me a future." John smiled back, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. They had come so far, and while the road ahead would still have its challenges, he knew they would face them together. They had built something real, something that would last, and it was just the beginning. "You know," John said, his voice thoughtful, "I used to think that power was everything, that it was the key to success. But now I know that it's not about power, it's about people. It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance, where everyone is treated with respect and dignity." Lyra nodded. "It's about love. It's about kindness. And it's about knowing that we are all equal." John looked at her, his heart full. "Yes, exactly. And as long as we remember that, nothing can stop us." As the sun set over the estate, casting a warm golden glow over the land, John and Lyra sat in silence, watching the future unfold before them. Together, they had created something that would change the world. And together, they would continue to build a future where freedom, equality, and love were